On this episode of High Impact Garage, at long last, Dave gets a new engine in his truck. Dave has long complained about the last engine I built in his truck as being too gutless, as in being gutless, not getting out of its own way, can't get up to speed on the highway, any of that. Dave has long complained about the last engine that we put in his truck, and he hates it. He absolutely, excruciatingly hates it. And I've heard for the last 10 years every complaint under the sun about this engine. Today we're going to remedy that problem by yanking it out and replacing it with something else that he'll probably complain about, but I'm not giving him any reason to complain. So to solve the problem, what we are doing is we are yanking out the Z24, the 2.2 liter engine that his truck was born with, and we are replacing it with a Z24. Now, this engine right here is rated for 103 horsepower. The engine coming out is rated for 97 horsepower. But the engine that's coming out was rated at 117 foot-pounds of torque at like 2,700 RPM. This one is rated for about 129 foot-pounds of torque at 3,600. So it's actually a little bit more torque, negligible on the horsepower. The difficulty with Dave's truck is making sure that it is smog legal, which is an issue that many people are going to have across the country in different places and different cities and whatnot. Now, if you're in California, what we're going to do is absolutely not going to be smog legal. You're going to have to come up with a better way of doing this. However, what we are doing is we are using a Weber 3236 carburetor and we are putting it in full emissions garb. Today, we are going to show you how you can fit a Z24 in your truck with a Weber 3236 and still keep the emissions stuff on it. This would apply to any federal truck up to 1984. This would apply to a lot of other trucks like the 81 to 83, whether California or not, on the Datsun line. So not wanting to bore you too awful much, this Z24 we just got done assembling. It's nothing special. There's nothing special about this Z24, aside from the fact that it's a Z24 with 20 over pistons and everything else is 100% stock. The big gain here is the carburetor. So you're going to note that's the stock air cleaner, or a stock-ish air cleaner, and that's a Weber carburetor. The two don't get along nicely. When you're talking about the emissions control devices on a Nissan truck, believe it or not, the Weber 3236 has all of the vacuum ports you would need to interface with the emissions devices that this engine has. The only big thing is that this tube across the front always ends up getting in the way because it goes to the air cleaner. This right here is your air induction tube. This guy, there's some models that have one, there's some models that have two. The key here is the air induction tube is kind of part of the federal emissions package on 83 and 84 models, pretty much all of them 81 to 82. This tube right here, its entire purpose is to allow negative air pulses to get into the exhaust to help complete combustion in the exhaust. That's it. It takes no horsepower. It's not that heavy. It doesn't have any weight to it. Or you're losing nothing with this. Notably absent, but will soon be back on here, is the EGR. So your EGR tube would come across from over here, wrap around the back, come into here. Those devices can stay on in an emissions application. We'll show you how those get hooked up. First, let's get this piece of junk tore apart. Well, I say piece of junk, but it's a 720. There's no junk to it. let's get that thing tore down and I'll start showing you what we're gonna have to do and how we get to interface stuff. So everybody accuses these engines of being giant consumers of vacuum line. Like there's tons and tons of vacuum line, but it's actually a really simple system if you get down to it. And a lot of I think everybody's so used to the Honda mystery box in the corner that they look at any vacuum line and they get all upset. But in reality, there's only a few lines that are going to come off and get changed. So let's first of all talk about this system. So let's actually start off in the corner here. So my hand where it's at, this right here is part of the boost control deceleration device, and it comes around and goes to the back of this carburetor here. A Weber does not have this. So it gets a vacuum signal right here off the manifold, which it looks like that's cracked. That could have been why it was running terrible. Noted. And it came around, feeds a vacuum signal to here, and it also tees off. The tee off goes to a vacuum switch that's mounted. Let's try and unplug that. So there's our vacuum switch. So the vacuum switch gets vacuum, and then this guy gets a line connected to it. And then when there's vacuum is high enough, then that device over there opens this guy up on the carburetor. So we can effectively delete all of that, including the vacuum switch on this system, because let's be honest, the vacuum switch is only really helping with our anti-dieseling solenoid, which is right here. So the fuel shutoff solenoid, anti-dieseling solenoid right here, the Weber does not have that either. So we'll get rid of all of this over here and these vacuum lines. So that gets to go away. We don't have to have any worry about them not functioning anymore. Now, that leaves us with this line right here. So there's a line that runs across out of the bottom of the carburetor right here. This is our vacuum advance line for the distributor. And then it goes to this wax valve over here, where my other hand is, the bottom port. That's just an air bleed. So when it's too cold, air bleeds off and doesn't allow us to have vacuum advance. That's all it is. That's to try and help warm the engine up quicker. Or so I'm told. Anyway, this line we definitely want to put on, and then there's a port on the Weber carburetor for it. Then we have this set of lines right here. Actually, before we get there, there's this line right here. That is our purge line from the charcoal canister. Then let's go back over to here. Okay, so we've got this line right here. So it comes off the carburetor right there. There's our EGR vacuum port. Comes around to the back. Goes the EGR valve and this Venturi vacuum transducer device. This is what determines whether or not the EGR is going to come on or not. And it has to have two things. It has to have, first off, back pressure in the exhaust in order to enable the EGR to open up. Actually, it's a lack of back pressure to enable the EGR to run up. And then this guy right here is a Venturi vacuum line. This pulls vacuum off of the Venturi of the carburetor. This is a secondary piece that enables EGR if the Venturi vacuum is present. So basically, only when it's in cruise is this system going to actually operate. And then, of course, that line comes around to the wax valve over here. And then aside from that, we have one line that goes to the air cleaner. And that's pretty much it. Coming over here, DJ is actively working on the air filter assembly. And so he's actually taking and modifying so that we can bolt the air cleaner onto the carburetor.
Yep.
Which that's a fun little job.
Don't do like me. I took too much metal out, now I gotta put metal back in. Do it slow. Trim around where you should. Work your way. Don't go crazy.
Well, it's gonna work out just fine, I think.
Oh yeah.
It looks great.
It will.
So let's take a look at the vacuum ports, where they would be. So this right here is our Venturi vacuum on a Weber carburetor. It's got a little plug on it. We'll remove that and hook our Venturi vacuum there. We have our EGR vacuum port right there, and then our vacuum port right there. So basically the same vacuum ports that we would have had on the Hitachi we have on the Weber. Now what do we gain with a Weber carburetor? This is a 3236. The gain is a mechanically operated secondary. The Hitachis have long been worried about and complained about as being, the Hitachis are usually complained about as being really lazy carbs, and I tend to agree. They work fine when they're in good condition. The benefit to a Weber carb, though, is a new carburetor, frankly. On the early trucks, the 81 to 82 trucks, these Webers are actually a bigger carburetor than the stock one, but on the 83 and later trucks, the Weber is actually a smaller carburetor. So I think the DCR 384 is like a 34 primary, 38 secondary. So it's actually a little bit bigger carburetor than a 3236, but it's still, it is what it is. You'll note one other thing right here. I've got the fuel line actually is hooked up on this truck. One of the things I've got going on here is you see this loop of hose. That's where the fuel line would have come up for the Hitachi. I've got it looped around coming in here. The return system, the Nissan's return system on these gave them the ability to run the fuel pump in such a way as to not overflow or over top the carburetor. So running a return line, ditching a fuel pressure regulator actually gets us to the correct pressure for this Weber to work right. And as DJ's had in the past, DJ's had issues with backfiring with the regulator, and his backfiring issues were resolved running the return line, correct?
Correct.
So, yeah. All right, well, we're going to get to work. We've got more things to do. Alright, so the engine is now out. It's on the ground over here. And then our engine is on the stand with a new oil pan on it. DJ is painting the air cleaner assembly now. Getting the basic, I think he's just laying on a primer on it first, or something to prime it a little bit. Now's the time to get all that stuff from this engine that needs to transfer over onto that. so now that it's a new day, went home yesterday. Next step is don't forget your pilot bushing in the back of the crankshaft. This is what the nose of the transmission rides on, and always make sure you put a new one in. Otherwise you can expect to have some funny noises coming from the back end of your engine, and you'll be like, what is that noise? And it's this. So what I've done is this is a bronze bushing. To lubricate it, I soaked it in motor oil overnight. So it's all soaked, saturated, ready to rock and roll. We'll put it in, it'll be fine. I like to take a clutch installer aligner tool, and this is plastic, and I'll put the bushing on the end of it and push it up to there, and then I'll just take my mallet and drive it in. And that's how I get these in. Make sure it's flush, which it is, and there we go. Alright, so good news is we've got the engine physically into the truck now, and I'm happy about that. I'm really happy about that because it was just a giant pain in the butt to get those motor mounts plugged into the little spots. I've tried it a number of different ways. Today we did it by removing the passenger mount and dropping it on the stud on the driver mount, and yeah, that was definitely not the right way. If I were to do it again, I would bolt it in on the passenger mount and loosen the driver mount and then pivot the driver mount into position. If I was to do it all over again, next time, yes, that's how I would do it. So yeah, here's DJ tightening down that mount, and of course the Z24 is now physically in the truck. Some of you are going to go, man, that's dirty. Why are you not cleaning everything up and prettying it up? DJ just said it. It's a daily driver. The reality here is I could doll this truck up, but the only time it's going to have the hood open to do anything is to check the oil and maybe make some adjustments and change it. As much as I do like having nice, pretty stuff, this truck is probably going to see a lot more of the mundane day-to-day. And you all in the viewership are just going to have to be okay with that. Alright, so we're really close to firing this thing up. I just wanted to take a moment. We've got this engine installed now. Got everything tightened up. And now this is the air filter that DJ was working on. And so this fits right over the Weber. And when all is said and done, you'll come up to it and you'll look at it and you'll be like, oh yeah, stock carburetor setup. And then of course, the other nice part is that all of our emissions hoses that we were talking about are all hooked up. The only thing is that we were able to delete the boost control deceleration device and that vacuum switch because it's no longer relevant to anything. When we're talking about emissions devices that are being checked for emissions, this right here, exhaust emission control type, these are what the emissions tech is looking for. So EGR, well, that's hooked up. AIV, that's this hose across the front. So AIV is air induction valve. OC is oxidizing catalyst, and 2-plug is the 2 sets of spark plugs that this engine was endowed with. It's provided that all of those components are on this engine at the time that it goes and gets smogged, and that it meets the requirements, the emissions requirements at the tailpipe, the state of Nevada says that is perfectly okay. So as long as we do that, as long as we get it all tuned in, it runs right and runs well, we're good. All right, so we got her all fired up. DJ's aiming the timing light down. Okay. All right, so. Hold up. Sound better? Or?
Yeah, we're around 5 degrees right there.
Should be 3, I think.
Yeah, 3 right there.
3?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll lock it down. Nice. All right, so base timing's set. Now we just need to get it up to temperature before we make any other crazy adjustments. So DJ, how you feeling about this one?
Oh, right out of the gate, it runs. It's idling. Like, we didn't even make any adjustments to the carburetor, and it's already running smooth.
It's like DJ said, no adjustments on that carburetor. That's as delivered, bolted on. So we're letting it run. We're getting it up to temperature. Coolant. Just waiting on thermostat to open. Valve train looks okay. Sounds okay. We're not smoking. Nothing. Just working out perfect. Alright, so back from a road test, and once you get these things up to temperature, after you first install, one of the big things you've got to do is do a valve adjustment. And we did a valve adjustment on this earlier, cold, to start it up and run it. But the reality is, these engines need, they're finicky in that sense. You need to make sure that the hot valve adjustment is correct. Otherwise, you could run into other drivability issues. The valve adjustment is going to directly relate to how well the engine is going to run long term. So if it's going to have misfires or anything like that, valve adjustment is going to help us out, making sure that we don't have that down the road, or maybe even a mismatched cylinder where maybe one exhaust valve's not touching quite long enough, and so it gets a little hot and burns. So valve adjustment, critical component of the job.
Okay.
All right, so you got the valve lash done, right?
Yeah. Yep.
How do you feel about it?
I feel pretty confident on it.
And you were just about to say the spec, and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
You're fine. 12 thousandths on intake and exhaust. So anyone watching the video that's working on one of these, that way you don't have to go to the service manual or waste your time.
So we're going to end this video right here. We're going to end it right here. And our next video is going to be getting this truck through Smog. So stay tuned for that. We're going to show you what it takes to get this truck, now that we've installed a Weber on it, through the Smog inspection. We've already verified the catalytic converters, seemingly okay. The carb adjustment seems to be okay. The valve adjustment seems to be okay. The ignition timing is set correctly. So our next step is really going to be, well, we'll let that next video explain it. So until next time, we'll see ya.